NGS IVDs face significant challenges under the IVDR due to their complexity and the rapid pace of technological advancements. One of the biggest hurdles is proving scientific validity and clinical performance, especially when NGS tests analyze thousands or even tens of thousands of genetic markers. The sheer volume of data makes it incredibly difficult to provide strong evidence that these markers are clinically relevant, while also ensuring the test consistently delivers reliable and meaningful results in a clinical setting. Adding to the complexity is the variability in sample types, data interpretation methods, and bioinformatic pipelines, which makes it challenging to meet the IVDR's stringent requirements for performance. The intended use of NGS tests further complicates this. While validating tests for specific genes may be feasible, broader tests, such as those analyzing whole exomes or transcriptomes, bring a massive scale of complexity. It's nearly impossible to validate the performance of thousands of genes individually, which is why targeted strategies are essential. Our team specializes in navigating these challenges, ensuring our clients remain compliant with the IVDR from development through post-market activities. We provide tailored strategies that meet the unique demands of large-scale genetic testing, allowing our clients to focus on innovation while staying fully compliant.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're gonna give everyone another minute or so before we get started on the webinar today. Thank you for those of you that have joined us so far. Okay, so welcome all to the webinar today. Today we're going to be talking about a very nice topic, innovation and regulation in the dental sector, a world of opportunities for manufacturers. So that's the session today is all about dental devices. So you can move on to the next slide. So just a little bit of background information about MDX. So MDX is a full-service medtech CRO. So we operate in the areas of clinical research, quality assurance, and regulatory affairs. So running a number of study feasibility and strategy, clinical investigation plans, study monitoring, and biostatistics, but also developing quality management systems, risk management implementation, and ISO 13485 compliance. But a big part of what we do, and one of the reasons for this webinar, as well as our work with a number of the world-leading dental companies, where we work in the areas of regulatory affairs, developing technical documentation, and then planning submissions and registrations for a lot of these devices in Europe and also in the US. Next slide, please. So just in terms of our track record, so MDX has collectively placed over 500 CE mark devices on the market. So we work across both the MDR regulation, but also the IVDR regulation. And we've conducted over 150 clinical investigations for medical devices. So the team is spread out. So we're a growing team, have a number of opportunities ongoing at the moment. So if you're also looking for a position, check our website or our LinkedIn page to look for our latest job adverts. But we've got a team of over 40 experts, and a lot of the team has also come from notified bodies and regulatory authorities and from industry as well. Next slide, please. So for the webinar today, I'll be the host of the webinar. So I'm actually here to learn as much as you all are. I don't come from the dental field. I'm Carlos, I'm the CEO of the organization, but I'm very happy that the webinar will be led by my colleagues Alberto Bardají and Joana Martins. So Alberto is the head of medical devices at MDX CRO, and he brings 20 years of international experience in the medical device industry, and is also a former notified body product specialist, working and operating at the senior level at a very large notified body in Europe. We also have our subject matter expert, Joana Martins, who is a QA and RA specialist at MDX. So Joana has a very impressive career, having spent several years at the University of Oxford as a medical device researcher, but also holding previous former QA/RA regulatory roles. And she is all hands on dental devices and clinical evaluation reports for dental devices and understand everything that has to do with the field. So very happy to be joined by the two experts, and I hope you will enjoy the webinar. Next, please. So the webinar today is really focused on the regulatory pathway for dental devices, because this is becoming increasingly complex under the EU MDR. And in one way or another, we at MDX are quite focused on providing support for a number, as I said before, the world-leading dental companies. And obviously for our clients and for industry overall, understanding these rules is really essential to avoid delays, unexpected clinical evidence demands, and costly redesigns on products. So hopefully we will provide you some key tips on all of these areas throughout the webinar, and also share our experience. With that said, I'll hand over to my colleagues Joana to run us through the agenda. So next slide, Joana, you can now take us through from here. Thank you all so much. What I would say is that if you've got any questions or comments during the webinar, feel free to post them in the chat. We'll have a Q&A session at the end where we'll try to answer as many questions as possible, and hopefully also keep an eye out for any announcements that we have during the session that will be posted in the chat function. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Carlos, for the introduction. So today we're going to focus on a few medical devices in the dental sector that we thought have some specific requirements and specific details that were worth mentioning. So we're going to cover dental implants and abutments. We're going to talk about custom-made devices, bone grafting materials and resorbable membranes, restorative materials, and we're going to finish with digital workflows in dentistry area. Next slide. So as Carlos was mentioning, the EU MDR has increased in terms of complexity, and one of the reasons is to focus on the PMS and clinical evidence. And the reasons for that, or what we can do to help avoid delays and avoid increasing the costs, is to clearly understand the intended use. So what are the conditions or the medical conditions of the medical device? What is the mode of action? Also the risk classification, so if there's a need for the notified body involvement or not. We're also going to be looking at the level of invasiveness of the device and if the duration of use. So if this is going to be implantable, if it's going to be short term or long term, and also if we're going to look at certain categories that the device can fall under that could help, for instance, reduce the regulatory burden. So looking at these 4 factors, among others, are going to help us define the regulatory strategy, not only towards commercialization of the medical devices, but also looking beyond that, looking at post-market surveillance and specific requirements. So we're going to be discussing that in this webinar. And just to say, not just because dental products are not the same, they are going to have different requirements, different details, different characteristics, and that's what we're going to be looking at here today. Next slide. Just to provide a couple of examples of dental device classes, just to show the variety of medical devices that we have in this area. So we have class 1, class 2A, class 2B, and class 3 devices. And just to show the difference, but for instance, class 2B devices, we have non-absorbable sutures. But in class 3, we have absorbable sutures. So this small difference is actually a very, very big difference in terms of regulatory pathways, in terms of the levels that's going to be required, and other requirements that the EU MDR requests. So it's really important to do the classification of the device very early on the development, and also make sure that is correct, because it's going to trigger an effect regarding documentation and evidence that's going to be required. Next slide. So we're starting today with dental implants, which is what most people think when we talk about medical devices in the dental sector. Next slide. And dental implants actually have a very interesting regulatory discussion. So as implants, so implantable devices that can be considered as a class 2B or as a class 3, depending on the characteristics. According to Rule 8, dental implants are usually considered as class 2B, but there's been an evolving discussion in terms of regulatory class, if dental implants can be considered as osseous fixation screws or not. And this is going to have an impact in terms of the clinical evidence that's going to be demanded from manufacturers. So there's always talk with our UTR notified body, because they have a view, they have a perspective on this. And as I mentioned, this is going to impact exemption rules that can have an impact. So in terms of interpretation, have a discussion with your notified body, have it based on design, intended purpose, material, and technological characteristics of your implant. Next slide. So one of the reasons is that if the dental implants can be considered as a well-established technology or not. If it's made of titanium or titanium alloys, the dental implants are usually considered as a well-established technology because they've been around for many decades. So there's already sufficient clinical evidence out there that we can use to support that for our titanium dental implants. However, with newer materials, and there's been an increased interest in ceramics like zirconia, but also tantalum and magnesium, because these are very brand new, there's not that much out there. It's usually not sufficient to have a literature search. So in those cases, if manufacturers are planning to have ceramic dental implants or magnesium dental implants, then a clinical investigation will likely be required because it's still considered as a bit of brand new. As I was saying, if it's considered as a well-established technology, then it can be the device can be considered as under Article 61.4, which means that if there is already sufficient clinical data, then we don't need to do a clinical investigation. But we do need to prove that, we need to have that to back it up. If so, then it's considered as a well-established technology, but always check that with your notified body. As an implantable device, sorry, just the previous slide. As an implantable device, you still need to have the implant, still need to have the summary of safety and clinical performance. This is always a requirement for implantable devices and class 3 devices. However, you can be exempt from having the implant card requirements. So again, this is always going to be about if it's considered to be the state of the art and characteristics of the implants, but always prepare a robust justification and legacy clinical evidence to show and discuss with your notified body. Next slide. With dental implants, it's also been highly increased in terms of interest in surface treatments. So there's different ways of doing this. You have coatings, anodization, sandblasting, plasma treatments, and there's a few advantages and disadvantages of each. But the goal is always to improve the biological properties in terms of to lead to osseointegration, to ensure that in the end we have a higher implant success. However, having these surface treatments can also introduce certain risks regarding chemicals and particles. Because of that, there's additional testing that we need to do to ensure that in the end the device is always safe and performs as intended. So some testing can be done regarding biocompatibility and toxicity, so following ISO 10993. We also need to look at stability of coatings, so to ensure that there are no particles coming out of the coating that can cause inflammation or that can cause failure of integration. We're all going to be looking at osseointegration effects because that's to make sure that it works, that the surface treatment is doing what we want it to do in terms of integration. We are going to be looking at extractables and leachables testing to ensure that there's nothing coming out that can have a harmful effect on the body. And lastly, we're going to be looking at durability under mechanical load. So because of the placement in the body, in the dental area, there's lots of mechanical forces involved. We want to make sure that we're going to be looking at mechanical fatigue, and there's not going to be any fractures that can lead to implant failure. So these additional testing are required. And I just wanted to point out as well, because we are dealing here with coatings, with chemicals, sometimes with nanoparticles. In that case, you need to follow the REACH regulation, which is another EU regulation that's going to be looking at chemicals and substances that can be harmful either to human health, also to environment. So that's another regulation that manufacturers need to be aware of and they need to follow. Next slide. Now, looking at dental abutments. Next slide. So dental abutments are used as a connector between the dental implant and the restoration, so the crowns, for instance. So because they are a connector, because they are always connected to the dental implant, they are considered as an implant because they are going to be permanently placed in the body and remain in contact with the tissue, but they are not considered as autonomous implants. So they will always rely on the dental implant as well. So when we are looking at safety, when we're looking at performance characteristics, we need to look at the whole system of abutment and dental implants. As I mentioned before, dental implants are considered most of the cases as class 2B. As abutments, they're going to have the same classification, so they're also going to be as class 2B, with some exceptions, again, depending on the intended use, directional contact, and other properties. Because of this connection with dental implants, and because, again, of the area where it's going to be placed in the body, regulatory documentation must address mechanical integrity. So again, we are going to be looking at fatigue testing following ISO 14801, and also be looking at torsion testing because of the way that's going to be placed, the way it's going to be used by the healthcare professionals. As before, we're also going to be looking at biocompatibility with soft tissue and or bone contact. But the most important thing to to know about the abutments as well is that because of this connection with the dental implant, we need to be looking at the compatibility between the two devices. One possibility, for instance, for manufacturers is for them to manufacture abutments that need to be connected to dental systems from other companies, from different brands. So it's very important, specifically in these cases, to be looking at mechanical, biological, and chemical and clinical evidence. So looking at all these different properties. And one of the things, for instance, in terms of chemical, is to avoid galvanic reactions. For instance, if we have a titanium implant with a cobalt chromium abutment, this can cause galvanic reactions. This is something to be aware of. In terms of compatibility, we're also going to be looking at platform dimensions, if they check or not, internal connection geometry, surface finish, and torque requirements, because all of this is going to have an effect in terms of the performance of the abutment and the dental system. And this is something that manufacturers need to be aware, is that as a manufacturer, when we are commercializing abutments, we cannot say this abutment is for general dental implants. We need to say this abutment works with dental system A, B, or C, and we need to have the evidence to show that, to back that up. So this is something that's going to be provided as information supplied to the user. So that's why we need to have all of these testings to make sure that these connections of abutment and dental systems work as intended and as safe as we wanted them to be. Next slide. So now we're going to focus a bit more on custom-made devices. Next slide. Custom-made devices they have a very specific definition in the MDR that they need to have a written prescription, and this written prescription needs to be by an authorized healthcare professional, and this needs to fit the particular needs and expectations of a particular patient. So it's going to be very specific, and because of that, the design characteristics are going to be the responsibility of the healthcare professional, because they are going to be the ones that are going to specify all of the little details that the manufacturer, that the device needs to have. And this is for it to be considered as a custom-made device. So true custom-made devices follow Article 52.8 conformity route. So this is with Annex 13 of the MDR and a few more requirements. They do not require a CE marking. However, we need to have a custom-made statement. And in that custom-made statement, we are going to say who is it for, what's the patient, or who is the patient. And it doesn't need to be the patient name, it can be a pseudonym. It's going to have the specific characteristics that the healthcare professional defined, and it needs to be said it is going to be a custom-made device. So there's a few other requirements for that statement, but this is the most important thing to know. So it's going to be a very specific pathway, and usually there is no involvement of notified body for custom-made devices. The only exception is for class 3 implantable devices. In that case, yes, then you need to have a notified body. But for all the other custom-made devices, then that's not required. Next slide, please. When we are talking about personalized abutments, the term personalized can lead into thinking of custom-made devices. However, for abutments, they are not strictly custom-made. And this is because of the way they are actually manufacturing, of the manufacturing process of the and how to get there to that stage. So usually abutments are produced or are manufactured within predefined design envelopes. So they are within certain parameters, more or less they can be manufactured with, and they have validated libraries and predefined connections. So when we have some details from the healthcare professional, it's not going to be detailed. It's not going to be very, very detailed, just more high general details to match that patient. So in the end, it's going to be the manufacturer that retains the design control and the responsibility of these abutments. So they are not going to be considered as custom made. They're going to be considered as patient matched devices. Again, in this case, we are still using patient data. It's just not the same level of patient data. They're going to be manufactured in validated parameters. They are going to be fully CE marked. So you're going to have a declaration of conformity in this case, and they're going to be subject to standard conformity assessment. One thing to point out, because we are using patient data, manufacturers or companies still need to follow the general data protection regulation as well. This will depend on the type of patient data that you have, but it's another regulation that companies need to follow. Next slide. So just to summarize, custom-made and patient-matched is not the same thing. They have different regulatory routes, and they're going to be depending on the manufacturing process behind it, the level of specifications, and if they have a written prescription by a healthcare professional or not. So these are the critical points here to think about if it's going to be custom-made or not. And there's going to be some products that are going to be considered either, or they can change again depending on the manufacturing process. And now I'm going to be passing over to Alberto to talk about the next few devices.
Thank you very much, Joanna. So I'll carry on with the next topic. I'd like to speak about semi-finished materials because this is one of the topics that can be somewhat controversial, and they sit in a borderline with regards to whether they are a medical device or not. So if we take the legal basis of the MDR, it all comes down to the definition of a medical device and whether the manufacturer has assigned the device a medical intended purpose. So for example, in general, industrial titanium bars or cobalt chromium powder is not considered to be a medical device because it can be used for several different applications, even if it's compliant with an ISO or ASTM standard that is intended for medical, but the supplier for that material is not selling it as raw titanium bar intended to mill crowns or to mill abutments for dentistry. They're just selling a titanium bar compliant with ISO, so and so. On the other hand, discs intended for manufacturing CAD/CAM crowns using CAD/CAM methods, like for example pre-sintered zirconia blocks, they are usually labeled as intended for producing a medical device, and then they most often bear a CE mark, and they are classified as a medical device. So some other examples that we may find, we spoke about pre-sintered zirconia discs. So those are the discs that are fixated onto a milling machine. Then once the shape is milled out, the result is put into an oven and sintered into a final condition. Also, one example is lithium disilicate milling blocks. So those are blocks that have a fixture in order to be able to assemble to a turning machine. And they are often CE marked because they are intended for the sole purpose to manufacture a dental crown. Wax or resin performs for lost wax casting. They are most of the medical devices. Some of them even have a sort of tooth-like shape, and they're intended for the doctor during surgery to shape them, for example, for a provisional restoration, but the purpose is clearly medical. So in that case, they are medical devices. And then certain dental casting alloys supplied for restorative use, like, for example, T-Lite comes to my mind, but there are others that are sold solely for the purpose of creating dental restorations, and in that case, they need to comply with the medical device regulation. Typically, these devices are a Class 2A for being invasive devices placed in the teeth. So usually they sit within the exemption of Rule 8. And some key considerations or hints for manufacturer is to define clearly the intended purpose, because that's going to rule the full regulatory pathway. Define the processing instructions, craft a risk management file covering downstream manufacturing. So when risk management is considered, it shall not only consider the use by the customer of the manufacturer, which would be the third-party prosthetic lab, but also the end user, which would be the patient. So the risk management needs to cover all the downstream steps. And also take into consideration the responsibilities within the final legal manufacturer. And that can include vigilance aspects or instructions for use provided to the final user and so on. So that's with regards to semi-finished restorative products that may be used in conjunction with dental implants and abutments, or they may be placed on native abutments. So tooth that have died or decayed, and then they have been milled into an abutment-like shape, and then the restoration has been fixated onto the native bone, the devitalized native tooth. So then often we see in more complex dental surgery grafting materials used, like those intended to augment or restore bone geometry. So most often these products are used in implant site preparation, sinus lift procedures, when the sinus needs to be lifted in order to allow for room for the implant placement, ridge augmentation for bony defects, or to cover for other periodontal defects like fenestrations and so on. There are three types of bone grafts. There are xenogenic bone grafting, which is derived from animal. It's animal origin, most often bovine. It's deproteinized bovine scaffold. Allogenic bone substitutes. So there's a human donor, but the bone has been processed. Sometimes this is harvested from the iliac crest in the hip, but it really comes down to the specific product. And then there are the synthetic bone substitutes, which we most often see in dental practice, including calcium phosphates, beta TCPs, hydroxyapatite, different types of ceramics, and so on. These three cases have in common that they are wholly or partially or mostly absorbed, and therefore, in most of the cases, they are long-term implantable devices, and they are resorbable, so they would fall into Class 3 classification. If they are non-resorbable, they are Class 2B. If they're resorbable, they're Class 3. And I'll go later through the considerations for resorbable devices. Another item or product category that we may see in advanced maxillofacial surgery for tooth restoration is resorbable membranes for tissue regeneration. The role of these products is setting a barrier between the bone that's intended to be augmented or restored and the soft tissue in the gingiva. And the purpose is to prevent the soft tissue invading the bony defect and allowing the bone to restore and to grow into that space. There are collagen membranes, some of them from animal origin. There are also synthetic resorbable barrier membranes. And as I say, they're used for separating soft tissue from bony defects, for guided tissue regeneration and to stabilize surgical sites. They are most often classified as class 3 as they are resorbable in a lot of cases, but other materials that may serve for the same purpose and that are not resorbable may be classified as class 2B. Then there are also hemostatic devices, which are sort of sponges that have the intent of stabilizing blood clots within a post-extraction site or to control post-extraction bleeding. They may be made of collagen as before, or also from oxidized regenerated cellulose and other materials. Same as with the membranes, they are most of them classified as class 3 because they are absorbable devices. So some considerations to make about resorbable devices, particularly surgically invasive ones, is that, as I mentioned before, they are class 3. So that means that the demand for clinical data is higher as compared to class 2A and even class 2B devices. And also some specific requirements within the MDR are applicable to them because of being class 3. But also with regards to the verification and validation of the design and of the product, there's some aspects that are specific to resorbable products. First one is the degradation profile. So it means establishing and defining what is the mechanism for degradation, whether it is predictable and consistent, and the influence of the patient variability and local environment on the degradation profile. So we want the degradation behavior to be consistent and predictable. Similarly, we want to ensure that there is mechanical integrity of the product whilst the functional phase is due. So the devices are intended to break down, but for a period of time, they need to withstand their space and sometimes some mechanical loads, and that needs to be defined by the manufacturer, and he needs to prove that the device will not break down before time. Then there's a need for dynamic biological evaluation, meaning the manufacturer must not only evaluate the biocompatibility of the device at the moment of implantation, but also throughout the life cycle and as the product degrades and the byproducts are generated and potentially leaked into the local environment. In that regards, toxicological assessment of the byproducts is needed, and also the exposure to the local and systemic media. And then, of course, it needs to be established whether the device will be fully absorbed or whether there will be leftover structures in situ. So those were some hints and some points to consider with regards to absorbable devices. Now I'd like to say a few words about restorative materials, which are most often used on tooth that remain in place. So the purpose of these materials is to fix or to functionalize tooth that have had a traumatic breakage, or maybe they have had some infection, or maybe they have some issues with the nerves or with the roots, and they have had to be acted on. So these materials include composites, glass ionomers, and lutein cements, veneering ceramics, stains, and glazers, and dental castings, including cobalt chromium and titanium-based systems. So it's a broad span of materials, and as they say, dentistry is a material science. It's a material science field, so understanding the materials and its properties and performance is key in this field. Anyhow, because all of them are most often used for the same purpose with similar long-term duration in the mouth, they are typically classified as class 2A because they're placed on the teeth. Some particular cases may have a more transient usage because they degrade faster, or because they're only meant to be placed for a drug delivery purpose in a transient way. So that's just some of the points to take into consideration. I'll speak a bit about medicated products in the next few slides. But before we go on to that, I'd like to speak about soft tissue barrier and film forming products. So this is a group that also often causes confusion because they are somehow in the borderline between a substance and a device, but because their primarily mode of action is mechanical and it's protecting sensibilized soft tissue or shielding aftas or skin lesions in order to allow them to heal, they are considered to be devices. So they actually have a mechanical mode of action. And then sometimes they are medicated, but that acts as a secondary or ancillary function to the main device. Under this category, we encounter gels forming a protective film over the oral mucosa, including hyaluronic acid, PVPs, carbomers, chitosan, etc. All of them are well established or mostly well established, and they are broadly used across the industry. Mucoadhesive patches and tablets for aphthous ulcers, film forming sprays for oral lesions, a lot of them also including like carbomers, hyaluronic acid, and so on, and also protective gingival pastes used to shield irritated tissue. Under the MDR, the classification is class 2A for being long-term devices in contact with the oral mucosa as per Rule 5. And these products act through a mechanical or barrier effect, not with a primary pharmacological action. Even though, as I mentioned, some of them do have anti-infective components, and some of them also have numbing components intended to reduce pain, and also some analgesic components. So following that comment, I'd like to speak a little bit about dental materials incorporating medicinal substances and how they are intended to demonstrate compliance under the MDR. So most of the scenarios we will encounter in dentistry are medicinal substances that are an integral part of a medical device, and they play an ancillary function to it. So the overall product or the combination product should be assessed under the principles of the MDR. However, the medicinal substance must be consulted to the competent authorities, to the European Medicines Agency. We support customers in that process, and we can provide our advice on what the technical documentation needs to show for the notified body, and what does the documentation on the active pharmacological principle must contain in order to prove efficacy and safety to the EMEA. So there's a step within the assessment by the notified body that is consulting the EMA. Then they issue a recommendation that comes back to the notified body, and then there's an overall recommendation for certification made by the notified body. But the ownership is the ownership belongs to the MDR compliance route. Just something to consider, that the fact that the device features some medicinal substances automatically elevates the classification to class 3. So some of these dental products have like a mild anesthetic, or it has like some well-established pharmacological compound, but regardless of that, they need to go through the consultation process, and they are classified as class 3. So to summarize what I mentioned before, the medicinal substances plays an ancillary role in most of the cases. The device has a principal action, most often a mechanical barrier one. There's a consultation required to be escalated to the EMA as part of the conformity assessment route, which is carried out by the notified body. And then finally, we wanted to say a few words about digital workflows in dentistry, because they are usually complex systems that not only feature software or hardware or active devices, but also they include the production of a final manufactured product that is going to be permanently placed in the tooth or long-term placed in the oral cavity. So they need to be assessed as a system because they have an overall intended purpose, but they are formed by independently CE-marked medical devices that each play a role and has a specific medical purpose within that overall purpose to restore a masticatory function, reduce pain, and so on. So typical products that we will see as part of digital workflows are intraoral scanners. Intraoral scanners are active medical devices that they may fall under class 1 because their intention is to capture images. They are for an intended therapeutic purpose, but usually it's a low-risk device. But depending on how the intended purpose is defined and the characteristics of the intraoral scanner, they may be considered as class 2A. But that's a separate discussion. But similar criteria applies to software used in digital dental workflows. Depending on the impact of the therapeutic decision or the therapeutic planning that the software is driving, the software may fall within class 1 or class 2A, even class 2B in certain cases, if the software is intended to plan like surgery and the result of a bad planning can result in severe injury to the patient and so on. And then as a result of these digital workflows, there are some manufactured outputs which can include restorations that we saw before. So we're somehow closing the loop and going back to the early part of the presentation. They can also generate surgical splints, and that would link back to what Joanna explained about implants and how they are placed in the correct position. And also they can be used to produce clear aligners. So all these products that are manufactured outputs from the digital workflows, they can fall under the patient match category or the custom-made category, depending on how the process is defined. But I can anticipate that what we see most commonly is that they are patient-matched products. And the reason for that is that the manufacturer puts in the market a software that enables these consumables or these outputs to be manufactured within a validated design envelope. So for example, he will only allow a certain thickness of wall for a clear liner, or he will only allow a certain displacement or movement of the tooth per week or per month. And outside of those parameters, he won't allow the design to be made. And the responsibility for the safety of the product relies on the manufacturer and not so much on the doctor. However, some specific products, for example, custom splints for surgery or certain particular splints or bite splints, can fall under the custom-made device category, depending on how the workflow is defined and whether the responsibility of the design lies within the doctor. As a side note, a lot of these devices, not just the software that is used for designing the output or for evaluating the condition of the patient, but also the software that is used to process the images gathered by an intraoral scanner are more and more incorporating artificial intelligence algorithms. So that has some implications and needs to be controlled with consideration to aspects like data governance, transparency, and also drift of the AI component if it's a dynamic algorithm, to ensure that the results delivered by the product are the same as time evolves. And the fact that some of these softwares or algorithms have AI incorporated means they need to comply not just with the MDR, but also with the EU AI Act. As a practical tip, the AI Act that does not expect these devices or these softwares to have two different sets of technical documentation, but it expects that the requirements from the AI Act are incorporated into the MDR technical documentation. This may include real-world testing data, it may include algorithm validation, and it may include transparency and data governance aspects, just to complete the requirements that are specified by the ESPRs in Annex 2 of the MDR. So just a few concluding remarks. It's a very miscellaneous field. So there are several aspects from oral health that may be needed to be treated with medical devices that live under the MDR regulation. It's a field that we're passionate about. We have a lot of experience in it. A few of us come from industry or research, like Joanna or myself, or a few team members as well, like Andre. And we are always happy to evaluate your case, to provide our support and guidance. And also we are passionate about driving innovation. So we are quite at the cutting edge of what's being put out in the market. And we are super happy to have that discussion with you. If you have any project that you're uncertain about, or you have some queries about your regulatory strategy, or you need us to create your verification and validation plan, or any deliverables from the technical documentation, including biological safety assessment, risk management, compliance with GSPRs, clinical evaluation, and so on. So we have explored the key regulatory shifts affecting dental medical devices, the classification challenges under the EU MDR, and just a side note here. So I think we can address most of the borderline classification cases because we've done already, and because we are also present in most of the discussions in the industry about the topics. But there's a proposal to amend the MDR that includes the consideration of a defined consultation route for borderline cases. So if you're developing a device and there's no way of concealing your understanding with that of a competent authority or of a notified body, there's a route for escalating this consultation, and that sets or establishes the right path forward. So we also gave a few hints about clinical evidence expectation. The weight of well-established technology consideration becomes higher, and that's something that we can help you with to assess whether your device can be considered well-established or not. And if it's not well-established, we can support you with your clinical investigations. And if it's well-established, we can help you with your clinical evaluation and support you with the usage of existing data for your submissions. Special categories such as grafting materials, membranes, and materials with a medicinal substance live within a special and complex regulatory framework. We have vast experience as well with a biological assessment of degradable or absorbable devices, and also with the consultation process for medicinal substances, so we can help you with that as well. Finally, just thank you for attending the webinar, and also Carlos and Joanna for your support and for your very interesting and valuable insights to the webinar. Feel free to contact us, and I would also like to open for questions. And if you want to write any questions in the chat, or Carlos, if you've gathered any questions, this is the time for us to address them.
Yeah, I've got a question, Alberto. I don't know, maybe for you. So if my dental product is already on the market under the MDD, then I need new clinical data under the MDR.
That's a really good question, and that's a topic that keeps coming up from our customers. So there's a guidance that's very useful, and we always reference here, which is the MDCG 2020-6, which talks about clinical data expectations for legacy devices marketed under the MDD. But as a rule of thumb, I would say for devices that are not well-established technology, yes, there's a need for clinical investigations. If the device is well-established, there's a matrix with a hierarchy of a higher quality or lower quality clinical data. And well-established technologies can target clinical data that is not on the top four. For example, it can leverage on published data or literature reviews. It can leverage on post-market surveillance data, state-of-the-art studies, data from registries, and so on. But not necessarily or not automatically there's a need for clinical investigations if the technology can be demonstrated to be well established.
Thank you very much, Alberto. A very comprehensive answer. And maybe one for Joanna. Joanna, so just based on what we've discussed today, so I'm still a little bit confused about these. So are there any actual custom-made devices in the dental sector?
Yeah, so in short answer, yes. So the thing about abutments and the reason why they are not custom made, but in fact they are patient match, is, for instance, the dentists don't actually specify that much. So the dentists don't request or they don't specify the internal connection geometry, they don't specify platform dimensions or material specifications or any other tolerances. That's why it's considered as patient matched. But there are indeed some devices that are considered custom-made devices for dental sector, and one of them is the dental crowns. And this is because when a dentist, when a healthcare professional is requesting a dental crown, they are providing some specifics that are for the patient. So they are looking at the shades, at the colors of the crown, they are looking at the material, they're asking for or specifying the anatomical form. So they are going deeper in terms of the requirements. Obviously, they still need to make sure that they have a written prescription that is for a very specific patient. And in the end, the design is going to be the responsibility of the healthcare professional and not another manufacturer, because they are the ones designing, in a way, the crowns in this case. But as long as it's not within a specified envelope, within the specified tolerances and parameters, then yes, it can be considered as a custom-made device. And this is something that is actually confirmed by MDCG 2021-3 on the custom-made devices.
Okay, so then as a follow-up question to that, what sort of validation data do you then need for a patient matched device? I don't know if that's an Alberto or Joanna question, but whoever feels that you can answer.
Yeah, Alberto, you can go.
I think we've both been involved in projects where this question has come up, and it's an important one. So I think what's important is that for a product to be patient matched, the manufacturer has to have a validated envelope that he knows within certain parameters the design is safe, and he can ensure that. So what's important here is that he's able to define within those offered parameters which is the worst case, and that then he performs the usual validation testing on the worst case configuration in the final condition. So that means For example, he's delivering an apartment that can be angulated up to 13 degrees. So he makes his assessment on which is the one generating the highest torque loads, which is the highest distance or the highest dimension, vertical dimension that they can deliver. And based on that, they go out and test that worst case configuration on the condition that it would be placed on the market.
Very good. Thanks so much, Alberto. I think those were all the questions that I have. I'm sure more will come up. I don't see any other questions in the chat, so I think this is a good moment to break. So thank you all for staying with us today. I know you've stayed right until the end, so very happy to see that. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. If you've got any questions coming up, you can always contact MDX. You can reach out to us via LinkedIn or via our email at contact@mdxcro.com, and very happy to work with you all very soon. Thanks all. Have a fantastic end of the week.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
I first encountered MDX as a client when I was working for a UK-based IVD manufacturer. MDX supported us with our clinical performance studies and performance evaluation activities, and throughout the project I was incredibly impressed with their approach and knowledge. The team was pragmatic, helpful and incredibly personable, which led to the formation of a strong working relationship. From the outside, you could see that the company was thriving and growing, so I knew that MDX was a company that I would love to be a part of. So when the opportunity presented itself to work for MDX, I quickly jumped in, and it's definitely a great decision in retrospect. I feel that company culture is a very strong and important aspect of MDX and its success. Despite all of our consultants being remote, you can really see the company culture from the get-go. Flexible working is a core belief here, so as someone that prefers to go to the gym or go for a run in the morning before starting work, it's great to be able to take that time for myself at any point throughout the day without having to ask permission to do so. The culture is summarised by MDX's 5 key principles: make it possible, make it win-win, keep improving, keep growing and keep it diverse.